Hi, Misha here, and last time we looked at some Star Trek Discovery ships, so now let's switch over and do a Star Wars video. Why not, as I kind of catch up on videos. And today, we'll look at the Six Legs, the All-Terrain Tactical Enforcer, the AT-TE, the main tank, in quotes, the main walker of the Grand Army of the Republic during the Clone War, and used for 5-6 years into the era of the Empire. And this is one of the micro Squadron examples, and I actually kind of like these because they're nominally in 1/72 scale. This one's actually quite on target. Some of their other ones, like say the Millennium Falcon, aren't to scale, but then again, making it in true scale would be massive. And I like that because I collect 1/72 scale die-cast, like real world fighter jets and tanks. So yeah, this actually kind of works for my other collections. And I've seen some at first kind of think this seems small. And if I had been thinking ahead, I would have grabbed like a 1/72 scale Abrams tank or, T-44, and you'd see just how this dwarfs them. And this actually might be more to scale than a lot of past projections, because there's been quite a few arguments about how big this thing really is. But anyway, you know me, we're going to go into the history, the features, engineering behind this, at least in the fictitious world, in a galaxy a long time ago and far away. And on to the spinny thing. Unfortunately, this isn't die-cast, it's just a type of plastic. But I've seen some complain that newer plastics feel flimsier than the stuff we had in the 80s. They might feel flimsier, but actually, thanks to kind of modern science and chemicals, they're actually more durable, and they tend to hold a little better detail. But I remember a lot of those seemingly durable plastics we had in the 80s were really actually brittle. They would break before they bent, and seemed like it was impossible to have like a G.I. Joe vehicle that didn't end up with a broken part. The Kenner Star Wars ships were a little more forgiving on the durability factor, I'll give them that. But obviously they did never do an AT-TE, because this did not come about until 2002 with Attack of the Clones, Episode 2. Everyone's favorite of all the prequels. Regardless, I think the Clones and Grand Army and the Clone War setting in a lot of ways has actually sparked even more imagination than the Galactic Civil War, Rebellion, and Empire. What do you think? Anyway, enough preambling here. What about this walker? Like I said, it was the primary ground vehicle, walker, or tank throughout the entire Clone Wars. And these were actually deployed at the first battle of Geonosis, 22 BBY. And they were able to get them onto the battlefield with the initial clone army because they were based on an earlier design. This was designed by Rothana Heavy Engineering, which was essentially purchased by Kuwat and became a subdivision of them. But originally it was developed years earlier as a support vehicle for outer rim planets, mining colonies, security transports, just kind of a policing and also heavy mining tool. And it was based on a 6-legged predator from their homeworld called the Arctic Whalmere, the Arctic Horny Whalmere, which is just terrifying, but not probably for the reasons they expected. So it was already a kind of pre-established design, especially the unique 6 legs and the drivetrain. There were pros and cons to this, and it does actually connect to later Imperial walkers. But they were able to quickly redesign it for frontline combat use with weapons emplacements and support for troops, and basically scale it up for mass production. So much so that during the Clone Wars, not just Rathana themselves would build these, but the main Kuwat drive yards would produce a sizable number. And yeah, these would be produced. And if you're wondering how these got on the planet, that was a question we always used to ask even back in the days of The Empire Strikes Back. At least for the Clone Wars, they tell us. Now, any Grand Army of the Republic capital ship or this larger scale transport could carry these, but the Acclimator, which was their initial carrier ship, had special sockets just for the ATTE. But to get it to the planet, it needed a specialized version of the LOT gunship called the LAATC, the cargo ship. And basically it would just grapple on and bring it down to the surface. Yeah. Good news is Star Wars is much more advanced than us, so it wouldn't fail, because this is not a light vehicle. And then once it hit the ground, this was a versatile machine. Offense, defense, close support of troops, even anti-aircraft. It could really do just about anything, including being a light transport in and of itself. So where do we begin? The length. Originally, this was stated to be around 13.5 meters. But many with kind of a brain realized that that would make it a little small for everything that it was needed to do. So then it was revised to be about 22 meters. That would work, except then it would be rather huge for what it was intended to do. Again, I should have grabbed a 1/32 scale tank, real world tank, to show you just how big this already is. Therefore, the reality is probably around in the middle, 16, 17 meters, which means it actually scales pretty well. This is about 8-9 inches long. It works. It's pretty low slung to the ground with these 6 legs, although having to coordinate them all required a good bit of computing power and operating. It meant it was very stable. This wasn't going to fall over or tip over. It's very squat. It also allowed it to climb up very sheer surfaces, very high degrees, also navigate pretty rocky terrain. It was also corrugated in the middle with 2 sections, and yeah, we'll look at that in this toy in a minute. So it was pretty flexible. Heck, the feet had sensors to help balance it. They were terrain sensors, and they could even be magnetized. And the hull itself was airtight. It was pressurized. In fact, these could operate in a vacuum for an extended period of time. And for their crew, it could actually carry up to 3 weeks worth of rations, which I'm sure were just the tastiest thing ever. Clone rations. And it had enough air and water recycling to basically go that long without topping off. And then, of course, it had its own power generating system. And that was actually located primarily on the underside and in the section in the middle where we have the connecting tunnel there. And then, of course, you see the weapons emplacements. And this is, after all, called Star Wars. So what are we warring with here? We have a total of 6. They're all identical. Mod 21 heavy laser emplacements. They're in these remotely controlled turrets. Pretty good traverse range here. We've got these 4 in the front. And then 2 more in the rear. These don't quite have the downward traverse because of the hull at the front ones, and of course with only 2. These are a little more limited just because of the armor. And these lasers were relatively rapid firing, relatively powerful, and they were basically anti-personnel to defend the tank against infantry or fast-moving vehicles, or to cover friendly troops on the ground. But of course, its main weapon is up here. In our turret, which does rotate, and the gun does have elevation, this is a heavy mass driver cannon, essentially an artillery piece, the Firefont 04 type, and much like a modern tank gun, it's capable of firing a very wide range of ordnance, shells, projectiles, including energy rounds and solid rounds. It could fire things like bunker busters, burrowing type rounds to get underground, sonic charges, kind of like what Jango Fett had on Slave 1, EMP rounds, what have you. The benefit to this cannon, it was powerful, and it had very good long range, and it was very versatile. It could be used in a defensive role to attack enemy armor coming in, or offensive role to attack fortifications. It could even be used in an anti-air role against, relatively slow-flying targets, although they were known to shoot down incoming missiles and rockets too. The downside to this cannon, it was relatively slow to fire, the rate, and at longer ranges, especially if the gunner wasn't all that skilled with it, all that practiced, accuracy would diminish. And speaking of a gunner, well, he's rather exposed. Yeah, now on a modern tank, you can open the hatch and pop out to look around. He's kind of stuck there. Let's just hope he has a hatch and a seat to get down if he needs to. There is another hatch on the back. Of course, this can rotate fully here, like so. So it does give pretty good cover there. And I decided to put the commander in the seat, even though usually this would just be a lowly private. And that gets us to the crew. The ATTE typically had a crew of 7 to 8 when it was fully manned and battle ready. In the front cockpit here, in the lower seat, we had the main driver or pilot. And then above him, we had the spotter or co-pilot, who also had control of the forward-facing cannons if needed. And the Walker armor, the Phase 1 armor, was very similar to everyone else's, except it had less plating in the midriff and other areas to make seating a little easier and better, more flexible. So the kind of torso and other joints of the armor were a little more forgiving and when it comes to movement. And this is where the variation in crew comes in. If you didn't have a dedicated commander, the pilot, the driver, would end up being the tank commander. So if he did that dual role, then you'd have a crew of 7. But oftentimes, there would be an actual clone commander around, because typically this would be loaded up with a couple of squadrons or some vehicles or a command post. So let's finish out with the crew and then talk about the passengers. Past the cockpit, the main body has 2 compartments, 2 sections, again with that kind of accordion connection. And you can remove the panels on this. And for the guns here, we do have a seated gunner. He could control both forward guns or share control with the spotter. And then behind him, in this one there's just 2 seats per side. But if it wasn't solid behind here there would be more kind of bench seats for up to 10 clones. So this is actually pretty close to actual size. Again, if it just was followed through, you could have 2 more rows there. But that was typically just the kind of crew compartment. Not a whole lot going on in the front aside from supporting the main gun down below. Maybe it needed loaders, it's not ever mentioned, or the computerized equipment targeting facilities for the driver. A lot more was going on in the rear of the thing. What in the butt, indeed. To that end, this actually just lifts off as a single piece. And we have 2 more gunners, each with their own cannon. And that's because they're in the back. They serve as eyes and ears looking rear. And also they're there to kind of protect the troops, because this was the main troop compartment. Now on this one, I'll move my cannon out of the way. We have 2 bark speeders. This same area, if it wasn't configured to carry these, could carry 10 troops, so 1 more squadron, but they didn't get seats. It was standing room only. So if you didn't have these speeders in here, there would actually be plenty of floor space for 10 of your little 1-inch guys to stand. Alternatively, this could also be configured, this rear section, as a mobile command post with holographic communications and kind of battlefield assessments. So you could have a small but efficient command post. And finally, it did store a small medical droid, an EM6 droid, for battlefield surgeries and patch-up duties. It could also carry 1 other type of light armor, which this doesn't come with, but actually I tried it out and it will fit. The ATRT, the little reconnaissance scout walker, the predecessor of the chicken walker as it happens. Instead of carrying 10 troops, it could carry 2 of these, although they would have to be in their stowed position. There isn't room for the legs to stretch up, so they would have 2 of these along with their 2 drivers instead. But like I said, I did try putting a couple of these in, and since the legs on these do move, they're not segmented joints, they just move around. You can also just detach the legs. So it's not quite as good as if they had all the joints. You had to get a little creative by kind of rolling them around. The gun also rotates, which is neat. It's one of my kind of favorite of the small ones. So yeah, you can stow these inside. But the way they designed it was for the bark speeder. Makes sense too. Either way, they could carry the troops or a couple of light scout type armor. Pretty versatile vehicle, in my opinion. And the armor, it was designed in such a way that when it was hit by energy rounds, it would dissipate across the whole hull. It was also shielded against EMP, electronic warfare attacks. However, it wasn't all that thick. And so if it was hit by a physical projectile, like a AP rocket, it would punch through. And depending on where it hit, it could either just do some damage or knock the whole tank out. I should also mention that because of the whole 6 legs thing and just its overall bulk and profile, it was only capable of hitting about 60 kilometers an hour, so under 40 miles per hour top speed, which honestly isn't that far off from a lot of more or less modern battle tanks. You know, some of the newest ones go faster, but, you know, most tanks don't hold all the extra stuff and carry an artillery piece on top like this quite does. So there is that. What do you think? And again, this one's pretty well kitted out here. When you get it from Micro Galaxy, you do actually get 5 troopers. You get a Rex, so clone commander. You get 1 driver, 1 pilot, and then you get 3 phase 1 clones, and then you can buy extra clones for like $3 each with a little vehicle like that ATRT at Walmart. They've got them in the little boxes. Little kind of reminds me of the old drugstore things we used to get as little kids when I was little, and just kind of little mystery boxes. So you can kit this out pretty good, and while it doesn't necessarily hold 28 figures, not without really doing some things, you can load this up pretty well. And on top of that, it's got some interesting motion to it. And when this went on sale on Amazon for like $22, I actually picked up a second one. Mostly because, that's 5 troopers right there. That's $15 just for the troopers. Plus, it does come with a bark speeder too. So let's talk about the features of this vehicle, its service, its eventual downfall, and why it was replaced. So let's move to my unpopulated one here. One thing you always kind of wondered about the AT-ATs, was how did you get from the tall walker down to the ground? Well, that's kind of solved here, both in the show and in this model, which is kind of neat. Set you down here for 1 second. There's actually an elevator built in. Now, it's not very fancy, but it is kind of geared, and it just slides up and down. It is hinged just a little bit. And just kind of rests down there. So if you had your 2 barks on there, they'd come down. Or if you had 10 troops, that would just drop down for rapid deployment. And that was kind of the idea. You could just get a squadron ready in, and then the squad in the front could crawl through this tunnel. Now there's nothing here on this one. It's just solid, but at least it's proportionally right. Here's that back gunnery position. This one's a little stick here. And the seats, little control panels and stuff. So let's talk about the honestly pretty cool flexibility of this. The Tactical Enforcer is used offensively at the first battle of Geonosis, and would be used defensively at many other things, including Christophus. It'd be at Ryloth, the second battle of Geonosis. It was a very common vehicle. Now, it would start to be partially phased out for the Juggernaut tank, but never fully so. Although, once you get to 20 and 19 BBY, these are increasingly deployed in the outer rim regions more and more. Less developed areas, going through terrain more than cities. And that's actually important for its disposition during the Imperial days. That's why I mention it. Like I said, we have 2 halves here of this structure. By the way, this would not have been shielded. And we have this connecting thing. Now, this is a rubber material. Hopefully it's a synthetic, or at least a good rubber that won't degrade over time. We'll only find out. But underneath is actually a gear. And you can bend this thing pretty good. That way up and that far down. And it's ratcheted, and it moves side to side as much as the legs will allow it. There. I think that's pretty neat that it has that middle movement. A lot of things would not. And the legs have some mobility 2. These, and you can move it here at the joint. Not sure if the foot has a okay, I think it's just, yeah, I do like that these are ratcheted, so even if they get loose, they've got some resistance. The front ones, I think, have a little less mobility. No, they got 2 as well. For some reason, I was thinking they just had 1. Of course, these are slightly smarter little feet. These are the big clod hoppers. So yeah, it's this middle piece here doesn't move, this middle joint. Funny that this doesn't have a middle joint in the middle. And this really doesn't either. I guess that's what I was thinking. The back leg has this kind of added joint, and that's where it doesn't move. So yeah, they all have 2 joints, although the back leg looks like it has 3. Curious how far I can push this back. Make it look kind of derpy. If you're waiting for me to break this, you know, you're not alone. I think that would be kind of funny. But like I said, they're shockingly durable for what they are. It's high centering. And I guess you could move this forward here. Or back. Oh, that's what we can do. Just actually, does that rotatable all the way? No, it stops there. Haven't really messed with the feet too much. But yeah, you can get it. That looks like a puppy that peed in the corner and knows it did something wrong and is hiding like hell from you. But it goes to show you how low profile. It's a wide body, but it could really get low, and that would let that ramp go all the way down. No, it's pretty neat as far as the flexibility. There's a lot of literally moving parts, and for, like I said, $22 with 5 little minifigures that also have movement in them. Nothing great, but it's like 3 POA. It's not bad, and it's surprisingly well detailed for what it is. Maybe that's why I like these. I'm sure they have paint and stuff, but they rely on a lot of physical texture so I can feel it. Like the control panels are not just stickers or anything. They actually have texturing for the screens and stuff. I don't know. Something to do. Dangers of online shopping. Anyway, yeah, so they were used throughout the Clone War, increasingly kind of going more and more out to the Outer Rim. And yeah, rather famously in Revenge of the Sith, which it's the 20th anniversary this year of that film, almost to the, month. We're in March and it came out in May. I remember going to that with my family, probably the last film I saw with my entire family. I was out of grad school at that point, so rare occasion, but we met for Star Wars. Anywho, and once the Empire took over, they changed things. Now, this was still in production the first year or two, but already by around 18 BBY, the Emperor signed an order to create a replacement, and so Orthana ceased full production, and therefore this would just kind of be maintained with the fleet they had. But of course, as stormtroopers started replacing clone troopers, as the Venator is replaced by the Victory class and Imperial class Star Destroyers, this no longer kind of suited the fleet. It had a lot of positives we've talked about, and the clones really liked it. It could even be basically a mobile base. But this armor was not all that strong. At the beginning of the Clone Wars, it was sufficient, but later on, once the Seppies really learned the weakness, they could work around it. It required, 7-8 crew to fully man it. And because it was so low to the ground, it was vulnerable to landmines or just other kind of ground vehicles. And it was vulnerable to fast-moving air vehicles. It's a pretty wide target, as you can imagine. You know, it's physically wide and long. So even if it's a low profile, it's not the, especially with its relatively slow speed. And again, these 6 legs have a lot of benefits, but they also made it complicated, so it wouldn't take but a good direct hit in this area right here, because again, your primary power generators and fuel cells are right here and underneath. So a landmine or a low-flying impact would just either destroy it outright or freeze it. And like I said, this cannon was relatively slow rate of fire, and there were newer, more accurate things. And these, it's nice having 4 laser cannons with a total of 3, even if you count the pilot 4 to guide them. But notice the traverse going down only goes so far. You can get in pretty well, but then the protection on the side is only that far, so there's blind spots. This top one can only depress this far and can't go up that far. So there's already kind of a blind spot on the sides. And then in the rear, which these are primarily done to defend the troops as they egressed, like I said, they really can't depress very far. And because of the armor, even they're side to side. So these are pretty fixed, meaning it's rear defenses. Well, if you came in fast and low, you could really get under there and do some damage. So that was kind of its main thing. It was more offensively geared than defensive, and it was relatively expensive to crew and maintain, and it needed its own special dropship to get to the planet. And frankly, they were fighting different foes in the Empire. They went from fighting a standing army like the CIS to insurgents, rebels, pirates, criminals, basically putting down social unrest. So, what did Rothana, what did Kuwat do? Well, you know where this is going. The ATTE was replaced by the AT-AT. AT-AT if you prefer, but I think AT-AT works best based on the naming conventions. Another micro galaxy, and these actually scale really well together. This is an earlier release by a bit, but it's a pretty impressive model. It's got fully moving legs. It uses that kind of same rubberized thing for the head here. But you notice it basically just has 2 relatively small cannon, not much more powerful than the lasers on here, and a few side guns besides. But that's it for its weaponry. But these taller legs, Rothana had experimented with putting longer legs on the TE even during the Clone War to address some of the issues. They also made it a much narrower silhouette. But mostly, they armored it up real good. The armor on the AT-AT is much, much stronger. And it can carry quite a few more troops, and it can carry 4, even 6 speeder bikes. It's definitely geared as more of a troop transport first and a tank second, whereas this is more of a tank first and a troop transport second. I mean, this rear compartment was always considered cramped by the clones. So that eventually started replacing it as early as 15 BBY. And so that's what the Empire was ordering. The AT-RT would be replaced by things like the Chicken Walker, the AT-ST as well. Again, you can really get some fun with the posings on these, the way they did them. The legs had these little cleats. I was trying to move it past it there. But we'll talk about this in a separate video. It's pretty well to scale as well. Certainly tall. So, what did the Empire do with their remaining TEs? Well, they basically just stayed in the Outer Rim. That's why I mentioned it earlier. They were used on garrisons. They were used kind of on problem worlds, or just remote, hostile, rocky, swampy worlds, snow worlds where they might, still be necessary for their stability. And just because they had them, they would take some and remove the main gun, just leaving the side cannons. They would even remove some of the side armor so that stormtroopers could use them as firing ports. Heck, some they would strip down, pretty much taking all the weapons off and just make them into dedicated cargo crawlers. I mean, this could carry up to 40 tons of stuff, pretty well stripped down. Not exactly fast, but it would get there. So they would repurpose them. And that's pretty much what would happen. They would see less and less combat as the Empire would roll on. And even by the time of the Civil War, a few of them were in backwater worlds, but they were no longer being used as frontline walkers, tanks. They were just kind of repurposed vehicles. Kind of like how sometimes tanks are turned into wrecker vehicles, towing vehicles after their main life is over. Of course, we do see these in 4 BBY, where Rex and his guys are living in one. And that's actually where we learned that the main cannon on the TE, while it was powerful for the Clone War era, cannot penetrate the armor of an AT-AT. Now, on the other hand, the AT-AT's cannons aren't near as powerful, but then again, the armor on the TE isn't as much. So, it's give and take. So by the Civil War, not really much happens. The Rebels did get some TEs and re-deco them, unlike with, say, the Y-Wing, where they stripped it down. With the Enforcer, they actually added armor to try to combat the Imperials, although in a sit-down, ground-pounding fight, the Rebels were always at a disadvantage. And that was pretty much it. They made tens of thousands of these, but many, many, many were lost in the wars. And the rest were just kind of slowly but surely given to attrition or cannibalized for their parts to keep other ones going. And the relatively complicated design meant that sooner or later they'd break down, and when that happens, they would go to Imperial scrapyards. So by the time of the fall of the Empire after Endor, the TE was gone. And that's the complete history. And just because it was close to hand, here's the RT's replacement in the chicken walker. You can tell the legs are virtually the same, just larger. And of course this holds 2 people and somewhat armored protection with more guns. This is one of the cases when, clearly superior to just a guy basically riding a walker. But we'll talk about these in another video. Let's wrap this one up. Covered naked. I probably will keep one of these as a carrier of light armor, and then maybe populate this other one with troops, just to have some differences. In the real world, it's no coincidence that these have a connection to the AT-AT. Ryan Church, when designing these, pretty much took inspiration from the stop motion capture of the AT-ATs from the original trilogy. Of course, these would be CGI, but they did their best to kind of make them look stop motion as translated through a computer. And they were intentionally meant to be the predecessor. They were in Attack of the Clones, but they were a relatively late addition to that movie. And they didn't really have a name in it. They were just called the Clone Walker. But very soon, video games, novels, the Clone Wars themselves would give it the name ATTE. And that would, of course, be affirmed as time would go by. And they took a lot of pride in this. I mean, it's... I think that's one thing that the modern Star Wars really misses the mark on most of the time, is the vehicle designs. Once in a while, they hit one. But the original trilogy and the sequels, their designs were unique. Which actually means the Enforcer here is some folks' favorite Star Wars ground vehicle. And I get it. The originals are cool and all, but there's something that's kind of more going on, and we get to spend a lot more time with it because of the Clone Wars TV shows and even the Tartakovsky short film, The Clone Connection, and a lot of lore. But what do you think? What's your favorite walker of either era? I'm kind of curious. I would like to see them do the AT-OT. I think that'd be a simple one for them to do, and it also kind of double as a place to put figures. Just, you know, it's basically an open bed truck. But the Juggernaut tank would be cool, but it would have to be so large to be in scale that either you'd have to intentionally make it out of scale, or you'd just have to kind of make it super expensive. And I don't know that either of those would really work out so great. There are other cool ones, though. The ATAP or the ATPD would be neat. I like ground vehicles, and I'd like to see more of them. And the clones definitely had their fair share. Hell, I'd even take a Saber tank. Why not? Anyway, guys, like I said, haven't made many videos on the channel, so I'll be catching up, and I'll probably post a black box video telling what's been going on next time. But this was out on the table. That's that we talk about it today. Let me know what you think, and if you want more, do actually comment, like, share, and subscribe. The more views I see on these things, the kind of more it makes them worthwhile doing. With that, wish everyone a good weekend as we roll into March. This is Misha. Catch you very soon. Next time.